Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great, great. Thank you for being here.
Sure, give me a second. I just need to close my door. Hold on.
Sure, go ahead.
All right.
Great, great. Thank you. Okay, what I'm going to do, if it's okay with you, I'll just kind of start what we're doing and introduce the Republican Party Network and kind of get living kind of a preview in terms of that we saw the film. We saw about 200 and some odd folks. And just about 30 seconds in terms of the reaction, which was pretty powerful. And then I have some questions. I hope you got some of my questions, but they're pretty much interested in what our folks are concerned about. So if it's okay with you, we just go ahead and start.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Great. Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the Republican Party Network. Republican Party Network is a community around the country of 50 states that we're looking at transforming the Republican Party into a grassroots party where we have distributive leadership, where people take responsibility for organizing at the grassroots level and deal with issues as opposed to just candidates. In other words, we talk with the community, all voters find out what their issues are, and then we connect those issues to candidates. And of course, one of the issues that we find very important to us is the whole issue of life. And several weeks ago, we were fortunate enough for our organization at the local level, United Republicans Green Valley Sarita, which is in southern Arizona, which also was involved with several other groups. And we saw the film Roe v. Wade. And I have to tell you, for those who have not seen the film, when we really didn't have an idea what to expect because everybody knows the conclusion. They know the end of the story. And so it wasn't those cliffhangers. But the thing that we did not know and did not understand is really what led up to it. And that's the power of this, more than even the end, but the power of it. And when this was over, I think you could feel the chills in the audience. And it was all ages. And what we asked the folks as a result of that is to go out and purchase the film, rent the film, show it to their family, show it to their kids. And since then, we've been getting great reaction. And we are absolutely excited today that we have Nick Loeb with us, who is basically the person responsible for this film in so many ways. He's agreed to kind of talk with us a little bit and answer some leading questions about where our folks are in terms of their interest. And I guess the first question, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We're delighted you're here. And quickly, I got one question for you that's come up. And obviously, you've been interviewed, I don't know, countless times. And one of the things that has come out through those interviews is that this was something that was very important to you, this film, and in terms of how it was produced, made. And I mean, this was something that you were really committed to. And I guess now the film's been out for a while and you've observed it. I guess we are interested in terms of your view as to its success thus far. Has it been successful? And I guess even more importantly, how do you measure success for a film like this?
Well, I think there's multiple different ways. I mean, if you take a look at, we've had, almost over 100 different reviewers review the movie, and we've been on every single streaming platform from Amazon to iTunes to Redbox to Vudu, DirecTV, Comcast, AT&T, you name it. We were number one on DVD sales on Amazon for, I think, the first month. So the film's been doing tremendous. For me, success doesn't, necessarily for this film come monetarily, but, more on the educational side, changing hearts and minds. Um, and I don't know, I don't speak to everyone out there who has watched the movie, and the majority of people who interview me are on my side anyway, and I don't get a chance to speak to a lot of people on the other side. But I come from New York, and I spend time between LA and Florida, so most of my friends are pro-choice. Even my Republican friends, most of them are pro-choice, and so the ones who have seen the film, a lot of them have had. I've had a few convert. I've had some who've taken pause, confused on the issue. And so to me, if that has happened more than outside my circle, that'd been great. And that's success for me.
Okay, so, and I guess in that sense, and you're certainly the expert on this, but uh, sometimes films, when they first come out, they have one meaning. And then years later, that changes. And I think we know that in a lot of films. I think I recall in one of your interviews, you mentioned JFK, the film that came out, in terms of its impact and what that means today. What do you think the film Roe v. Wade, regardless of what happens in the courts down the road, what do you see happening? What do you think the film legacy will be down the road?
Well, I think it'll be an educational tool. Right now we're working on a graphic novel to go alongside of it. It's going to be a teaching tool in high schools and universities. I think it's important, because it's the most famous court case in American history. I mean, everyone has heard of Roe v. Wade. Even young people today have heard of Roe v. Wade. But as I like to say, it's the court case that everyone has heard of, but nobody knows anything about. And I think today the media is so polarized, and obviously most of the media is really controlled by one side, and they'll sort of tell you one side of the story. And I think this is an important tool to be able to show what really happened, the truth, and it shows both sides of the story. I mean, we talked about the pro-choice arguments. We went through the majority of the film are the pro-choicers. I mean, 90% of the movie was their mission to get this passed. And I think it's important if we're going to continue to talk about Roe, that people understand how it came to be, how and why it was decided. So I hope this film will have longevity as an educational tool. Anybody who wants to know about Roe v. Wade, they can just watch the movie.
Yeah. With that, the educational part of it, I don't know if this was the intent, but obviously the conflict of interest that was on the court that I was not aware of. I mean, I was not aware of that, and I can tell you, talking to the couple hundred folks in our audience that watched it, most folks were not. At least they didn't realize how blatant it was at that point. So I have a question for you. One was that, and maybe this is an obvious one, but was that part of the intent to show the audience, as far as getting back to that education, that what was really going on at the time? And then the second one, and this is where you look into your speculation about what's happening today, was that really a kind of a prelude to what's going on today with regard to conflicts of interest on the court? Otherwise, in other words, are you saying something bigger for the audience?
I think what's hard to capture in the film, and it really had nothing to do with some of it had to do with today, but not really at the conflict of interest level. What happened to the parallels of today really is two things. One, the fake news is nothing new, right? It's been going on since the beginning of time, and probably even worse when there were no other outlets to combat it. I mean, what did back in the 60s and 70s, where there was ABC, CBS, and NBC, and that was it. You didn't have podcasts, you didn't have Fox, you didn't have Daily Wire, you didn't have people to say anything different. So you could say anything, and if it got printed, there was nobody there to say to the opposite, or So I think fake news was probably more rampant back then. As you can see, it continues today, and I think that was part of the underlying message. I think also what people miss, and it's hard to portray in a film unless you grew up during the time period, you probably wouldn't have noticed it, but the women's movement at the time was overwhelming. It literally, I would say it's almost like the BLM movement today. It was on the news constantly. If you didn't say or do the right thing, you got criticized or canceled. That's essentially what it was like during the women's movement. So if you didn't say yes to women for everything, you got canceled. And so the justices were under that pressure. And it's hard for that to come about on screen. I see there are parallels today, not with abortion, but with the court actually hearing cases being pressured by the media. You know, if you take up anything to do with the presidential election, you're a conspiracy theorist, right? And that was the message that went out from the mainstream media. And how many courts took up anything to do with the election? Zero.
Right.
And listen, whether and if the media pressure existed back then and exists today, I think those are really the parallels of that happening, and not necessarily. I think conflicts of interest aren't really. It's very hard to have those anymore because everyone is looking at everything with a fine-tooth comb today, and so the slightest conflict of interest on either side, you know, everyone goes berserk over, and they, you know, dig in deep to everything, you know. And it's funny, you know, the conflict of interest back then wasn't, you know, it was, you know, it came out in the courts. It wasn't the conservatives that outed the justices. It was actually Sarah Weddington, who is the lawyer for Norma Morcovery, who wrote a book. And she talked about this in her book, how she researched the justices, knew, you know, where they wanted to know where the justices stood before they got into the courtroom, so they knew who to play to, who was on the fence. And so they knew Potter Stewart's wife worked for Planned Parenthood. She wrote that in her book. So they knew he was on their side already, so they didn't need to play him. She wrote all about that in her book. So we got all this information. And most of the information that shows that the pro-choicers in a negative light in the movie came from their own books and their own speeches. It didn't come from the conservatives vilifying them at all, which I thought was, you know, relatively interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So with that then, and thinking of the court at that time and public opinion, I think the points you're making are really interesting in the sense that what we're seeing today is not that different. It's just that today, it's like you said, every little thing is looked at in detail and magnified in such a way that it appears as if it's pervasive everywhere. But at that time, was the court leading or following public opinion?
Well, I think that, I mean, they were. I mean, in this particular case, they followed public opinion. I can't tell you what they did in other cases. I mean, when public opinion is so overwhelming, you don't have a choice. I mean, look at Hollywood today. I mean, if you don't join Black Lives Matter and go out there and say this is a great movement, you get canceled. Like it's like if you don't follow in tow with what pop culture, the media wants today, so you're a racist. You're automatically branded a racist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at what happened to Tom Hanks. Now they're talking about he's getting canceled because who's a lib.
Yeah,
He's getting canceled, but he hasn't come out enough for BLM, or he hasn't come out for the anti-racist movement. And since he hasn't even, you know, come out of this movement, he, you know, they're gonna. I mean, it's lunacy. And so, you know, that there's pressure there. So I can't. You have to imagine that's exactly the same thing that was going on in the 70s with the women's movement.
Okay. So with that, then looking at fast forward to today, and
I mean, there's a scene we wrote, you know, in Justice Blackmun is at the dinner table with his daughters and his wife, and he said, so you say, like, I'm voting against this, I'm voting against women.
Yeah.
He goes, yes, there was 20,000 of them marching.
Yeah, yeah. That was powerful.
And he literally panicked. Oh my, what did they find out? I voted against women. Everyone will, you know, I'll be canceled. In cancel culture back then, but you know, you'd be labeled a chauvinist.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was very clear in the film. And I was watching, when I was watching folks there, looking at different pieces and parts. And I talked to, it's interesting you say that. I talked to a few folks afterwards, and they made the exact same comment you did, in a sense that it's not that any different today. It's just the words we're using, the terms we're using.
Right. And the thing is, I'm 45. I was born in 1975, so I didn't grow up in the 70s. So I don't really know what it was like. But from the people that I talked to in interview, who were there, and a lot of the guys who played the justices, were around during this time. I had long conversations with John about this, telling me what was going on, during this time. He's 82, so he grew up during the 70s.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you're right, because I was around at that time, and it was a national groupthink in terms of the women's movement. It's a good point. But so with that, then thinking in terms of today, from your perspective, and you, like you've said, you pretty much talked about this film almost in every possible venue. Is it changing public opinion? We see that now a little bit here and there, at least glimpses. The Supreme Court's going to be taking up a decision soon, or rather, they're going to be voting on a decision soon. Do you think public opinion is changing? And if it is, what role, if any, has your film played in that?
I'm not sure that public opinion on abortion today is so overwhelming as on the pro-choice side as it was back then or when I was growing up. And I think, because the country is so split on this, I think, what's really interesting today, if you look at any of the statistics, although the youth coming out of universities today are more progressive than ever when it comes to sexuality, gender, etc., but they're actually trending more conservative when it comes to the life issue. More kids today are pro-life than ever in history, and we see that the number one reason is Google, the internet. Kids can now go on and they question something, they Google, and at 6 weeks they see a heartbeat, they see
Right.
fingers, eyes, mouth, they see it's a real human being, and so that's changing the opinion. So I that's why there's been, I think the voice has been loud on both sides. So I'm not sure public opinion. Listen, the Supreme Court took it up, a month after my film came out. I mean, who knows? Sure, will this add to the conversation? Hopefully it will. And hopefully people will see it over time. I don't think this Supreme Court case is going to overturn Roe v. Wade,
Right.
even if they vote. It has not, the media has sort of blown this case out of proportion.
Right.
It really has nothing to do with Roe v. Wade. It just has to do with letting that state, I can't remember what state it's for, allowing them to reduce the time you can have an abortion. But the media, wants everyone to panic, and so of course they utilize Roe v. Wade's going to be overturned, right? This is going to and it was which is a complete fabrication of the truth, constantly. And so, yes, I think over time, out of all the conservative issues that we have on the table, I think this is one thing in my lifetime that we'll see overturned. I'm not sure this case will do it. And a lot of it has to do because the population is trending, understanding that there is a human being in a life there.
Yeah, yeah.
And that new generation in 20 years will be in leadership roles. So.
Right. Well, I think that's I think your point's well taken. It's information out there. So thinking in terms then of the movement itself, the movement of life, or however you want to frame it, you mentioned, I think to me in our beginning when we were talking about us showing the film, your concerns or your observations, probably a better way of describing it, of the various organizations out there that are pro-life, and that one of the obstacles to changing public opinion is how these organizations even connect with each other.
Well, they don't.
Yeah, I'd like your feelings on that, because that's exactly what we are. We're moving in that direction. So I'm interested in your ideas.
Well, we're up against one organization, Planned Parenthood, and so the challenge is, we have right to life organizations in every single state in the country. We have, over a dozen in DC alone. In a lot of states, there's more than one or two in towns, and we hundreds of organizations. So with every organization, people need to understand you need overhead, you need offices, you need to run it, and so all that money is spent divided up between hundreds of organizations when Planned Parenthood has one organization to pay for, and all the money can be utilized for media, for lobbyists, advertising, all of that, and ours don't. And not only that, most of our organizations hate each other because they're all competing for the same dollars. They're all competing for the same donors. There are not a lot of major donors out there that are pro-life. Although there are a lot of not writing massive checks. So, the majority of money for these organizations come from small dollars. So, and everyone is, and they won't help each other. They won't help each other. They won't support each other. Some won't talk to each other. It's phenomenal. And a lot of it has to do because they don't want to lose control. They don't want to lose the small little power they have. And unfortunately, that's never going to change, right? You're never going to get, the March for Life people to say, hey, let's join forces with the National Right to Life and have one organization, because somebody will then not be president anymore, right? And people will have to lose jobs, and it unfortunately, it's like asking Congress to term limit themselves. I mean,
Yeah.
It's just incredible, and the majority of the organizations, not only do they spend the majority of their money on overhead, they blow half their money on preaching to themselves. I mean, they don't reach across the aisle. They don't do any media. They literally have galas to raise for their own people, to raise money for their own people, to do their own marches, to have their own people. And so it's a complete waste. None of them understand the media. They don't want to spend money anywhere else besides their own galas and their own little walks that don't move the needle and don't change anything. And if you want to change something today, in today's world, in today's culture, you do it through pop culture. I mean, look, Planned Parenthood went out there and spent $20 million on a Kim Kardashian episode where the Kardashians went to a clinic to talk about how wonderful their services were. And we won't spend a dime on pop culture. And pop culture moves the needle. Look, there was one guy out there who knew how to use pop culture, and he got himself elected president of the United States using pop culture. And we all know who that is. And that's why he moved the needle. Like, you may not like Donald Trump, you may hate him, love him, I really don't care. But he moved the needle for whatever his agenda was, and he did it through pop culture. He did it through TV, radio, the media, Twitter, social media, pop culture, right? And he got that done because he knows how to do that.
Right.
But nobody else in our movement, in the Republican Party, to say it in all aspects of the Republican Party, utilize pop culture for anything. And they can come out and say, well, Hollywood doesn't like us. They won't do. Well, listen, I just made a Hollywood movie, right? With a real Hollywood actors for a conservative issue. And I can give you a handful of organizations that would not support us when making the movie or even releasing the movie. There was a handful that did, but there was another handful. We went to the March for Life that has, over 1 million, people on their rolls to call to do the march. We asked them, would you send out an email telling them about the movie? They wouldn't respond to us. But you got people like Susan B. Anthony that did. They sent out an email, they posted stuff, they put stuff on Twitter, they were great. So was National Right to Life. But I can, give you, another handful of organizations that are massive that wouldn't respond, wouldn't be helpful, didn't want to support another organization. It's just incredible.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say all that because obviously what we're looking at as our network is to try to combat that. And, we're small potatoes at this point. We've been only in existence for 2 months, but the kinds of things that you're talking about, of course, we're seeing at more of a micro level because you were dealing with it nationally and obviously a big film and all of that. But we see that Our focus is on Republican clubs because we feel that only at the ground level that we can do it. And we're finding the same issue. The provincial nature of our issues and the things that are important to us, certainly life, we're seeing that. The resistance is everywhere. So with that, then let's turn, and I appreciate the time you're giving to us. So we get to the end here. You mentioned in the beginning a new project, and I'm kind of curious as to that. If you can give us a preview, and also how this fits in with the film, and then just as importantly, how it fits in with the challenges that we face in the whole life movement.
You mean my new movie?
Well, you said you were thinking in terms of something as in addition to. Did you say something in terms of that you were?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, what we're doing is we're making. Well, I'm doing a new movie that has nothing to do with life, but what we are doing is we're doing a graphic novel. For those who don't know what a graphic novel is, it's sort of a book that's sort of drawn like a comic book,
Right.
but more like an adult theme with comic book characters. And when I went to school, I remember taking religion classes, and they had the Bible, but it was a comic book Bible, right? I was in junior high school. It was easier to read. It was more fun. I learned about the Bible and the stories that way. Clinton Cash, that was a big famous, book, and they came out also with a graphic novel. And so we're in the process of making a graphic novel, which is essentially a comic book on the story of the film, and the story of Roe v. Wade. And I don't know how long it's going to take us to do that, but then that accompanied with the movie, we'll start going to schools and universities to try to get it into their curriculum. Obviously, I'm sure public schools and a lot of the most schools probably won't have us, but there are a lot of Christian Catholic schools that would be very interested in Catholic universities and conservative groups, and maybe even conservative clubs at these the Right to Life club at some of these universities that would be interested in adding this to part of their their club and things. So that would be it's a fun thing to do to try to get more kids interested, involved in learning about Roe.
Okay, well, keep us in mind when it comes to that, because we have lots of folks that would be very interested in supporting and helping you in that effort. I can assure you that. We're another issue, which is another whole side, is we're very much into dealing with the government school monopoly and looking at some issues there, but that's another story. The point is, keep us in mind. So I can't let you go without asking you then, what is your next project and your film? Because I know that if I didn't do that, people would be real critical of me. So what's your next film that we ought to be looking
Sure.
for?
So everyone can look it up. It's the true story of a slave named James Armistead Lafayette. And during the American Revolution, both the Americans and the British offered emancipation to slaves that would come and fight for them. And this is the true story of a slave recruited by George Washington to spy on the British during the Revolution. It's a big action spy thriller about this slave named James, who is not only was a spy, but he got information to George Washington that was critical in Washington winning the war. So when the British were moving their troops down to Yorktown, Washington was able to surprise attack them before they got there. He got that information from James Lafayette. Without that information, America, who only had 20,000 troops compared to 20,000 ragtag troops, right? Not even professional, compared to the biggest military. I mean, it would be like America today going to war against Canada, right? Against, Britain's 100,000, a massive army. We should not have won, let alone win anything at Yorktown, and only won because we had a surprise attack, only because we got this information from James, a story that's been completely left out of history. And for obvious reasons, because he was a slave, and a lot of these stories probably weren't written down. And you can look at the story, read the story. It's on, you can Google about it. And I think today it's, with everything going on with Black Lives Matter, I think it's really important not to tell these hidden figure stories, but more importantly, to tell these hidden figure stories of military heroes. Because every time we kneel for our national anthem, our flag, or our military, I want the world to understand that we're not kneeling just against white people. We're kneeling against all races who have died, Black, white, and brown, who have died and sacrificed their lives for this country, not just white Americans. And some of them, including James, who was an American hero, you're kneeling against the guy who essentially helped with the foundations of America.
Right.
And so I think that this is an important story and an important time to tell. And, in the process of looking for a director and raising the money and putting the whole thing together.
Okay. Well, we'll have to look forward to that one. Listen, I want to thank you very much for a short little interview here. We really appreciate it. We're going to keep in touch with you in terms of how this goes. And again, let us know anything in terms of how we can help and support the work that you're doing. And I know our folks are really appreciative of you taking a little time. So thanks very much.
Of course, my pleasure.
Take care.
Take care.